Hi, I am Nick Dilly, and you are now watching the MMA Conspiracy Hour with Todd Adkins and Miguel Iturrate for conspiracies, combat sports, and so much more. You better stay tuned, or I'll come find you. Night Queen style.
All right, so this is Todd Atkins, and I'm back with Miguel Iturrate. And although this is a MMA Conspiracy Hour, I think this one is going to be a little bit more of an educational type of episode where Miguel's going to kind of educate some people on a topic of Weili Zhang versus Yan Xiaonan, the current top of the bill of the UFC. I know they have another fight that they're trying to put at the top, but um, we're talking about how this is the money fight of UFC 300. And Miguel has been kind of touching on this in past episodes a little bit, but I wanted to give him an opportunity to kind of do an episode on this where he could really kind of go in depth and peel back the onion a little bit, so to speak, on this topic. Because I think a lot of people are missing this. And yeah, we always, as always, before we start, I want to thank Live to Fight and Bet Stamp, our sponsors here. And Miguel, I kind of want to give you a chance to give kind of your opening, salvo on this particular topic.
Well, Dana sort of made an announcement. It wasn't your typical, hey, we're going to announce the main event, rah, rah Dana. It was sort of more cool and lackadaisical. So this Saturday, we may get another fight added, and maybe, if it's going to be on top of this title fight, it could be another title fight, So, I don't think Makhachev's available. I don't think I think they'd struggle to get him a visa. So it can't be Makhachev. I don't think it's Duplessis. It's too close to his last fight. Leon Edwards, maybe it's Leon Edwards, but does Leon Edwards move the needle that much in the United States? Not all that much. Maybe Jiri Pereira, the rematch, if they can make that happen and stuff, that would be a good match. But again, I don't think that's a pay-per-view blockbuster kind of thing where, both guys are going to take the numbers through the ceiling. It'd be a good fight. Maybe John Jones and Stipe, or maybe John Jones and Aspinall finally gets done, and that's what they're going to announce. But you look at the writing on the wall, and I think Jones actually made a statement that it's not him. So I think you look at the writing on the wall, and there are no hints really of that one coming, anytime soon. So I don't think that's the case. Maybe they've got Connor and Chandler in their back pocket, and all the shenanigans of it being in at the end of the year or whatever, were to make it a big announcement, to add to the hype to it. So we'll see what he says. But short of McGregor being on this card, I think that this Chinese title fight is the moneymaker fight of the card. And they know that. So whatever they add, they're going to try to do something. And here's the catch-22 of it is it's the moneymaker fight of the card, and we'll get into that and why. But it will never move the needle in the United States. They're never going to convince people it's a great fight. Like, oh, okay, yeah, you're right. It's going to be a great fight. We'll watch it. They're always going to get, crap if they go with that as the total main event of the fight, because it's, 125-pound foreign women. You can't expect it to move the needle in the United States the way, Jones versus Aspinall would, or Jones versus Stipe, or something like that. So yeah, I understand that. But how are they going to make money off of this show? I believe that the money that they'll make in China from this fight is going to be enough to satisfy them. So that's why I don't think you see the urgency from the UFC of putting up another big fight. Or, usually what you'd see Dana crapping on the internet on the fighters who are not signing, or who are holding out, or who want more money, or whatever. You're not getting any of that. What could the main event be? What could they announce? So we've already gone through a little bit of the list. It sort of has to be a title fight. So You've got limited champions. I don't think, O'Malley's ready. O'Malley versus Aljamain went down.
Well,
Aljamain
O'Malley's
was,
already going to be on 299, so that's not happening.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
that's the main
O'Malley,
event of 299s. They're not going to move that.
and O'Malley was, you know, kind of outed by Aljamain in his last fight where, he said, hey, we didn't sell as many pay-per-views as, they kind of hyped him as this pay-per-view star, and that's not really, that's not really the case here. So, yeah. Pause for a second. I got to answer this.
Okay. Go ahead.
Strickland might be good to go, but like I said, Duplessis, I don't think should fight. That fight was kind of recent. He was banged up in his face. I think he came out of it, relatively unscathed, but his face showed it. You don't want to go in there with thin skin to a fight too soon. You want to give your bumps and bruises time to heal just as much as, a broken bone or something more severe, because you don't want to, become cut to, prone to cuts and things like that. So I don't think Duplessis Strickland rematch is an option. Like I said, Pereira Jiri would be a good fight, but again, you're talking about a Brazilian against a European. On the American market, you can't expect that to break pay-per-view, box office numbers. So, yeah, they got their backs against the wall. It's either Jones or McGregor, and the writing's not on the wall there. So, what is the deal with this Chinese girls, the ladies, Weili Zhang, and you tell me the other girl's name?
Xiaonan, I think is how they pronounce it.
Okay.
Mhm.
We'll go with that. I just, out of respect, I don't want to get it wrong. So, if you look back at it, I believe we found a reference in the pre warm up for this interview here, or for this podcast here, that in 2021, the UFC mentioned that they had over 150 million followers and
No,
fans.
170 million fans in China.
Yeah, 170 million fans in China.
Yeah.
That's approximately 40% of the U.S. population.
Yeah, close to half. Yeah.
40% of the U.S. population doesn't watch the UFC.
Yeah.
It's not even close to that number. So what you have over there is, if you get, of those 170 million, half of them tuning in to a title fight, if properly advertised, you have two Chinese fighters fighting for a world title in an American sport. That should make news over there. Now, they may be considered rivals, and world politics are very tense right now, and you could get into all of that and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, their culture does drink up American pop culture, media, sports, movies, things like that. And they criticize movies if there's a mention that makes China look bad, or things like that, and they cancel things that make China look bad. I'll bring you the example of, I believe this happened within the last few years, that the Houston Rockets. Now, keep in mind, Yao Ming played for the Houston Rockets, so the Houston Rockets count every year on having sales of their T-shirts in China, and they bring home a lot of money of Yao Ming shirts. Now, maybe that number's gone down a little bit, but even with the retro market and stuff like that, and Yao makes his appearances every once in a while. It's hard not to notice a guy 7'5". So he's big over there. And the Rockets were on TV; their games were shown over there, and they have people that follow it. And basketball is very popular in China. Now, the Houston Rockets GM made a mention about Taiwan. He got involved with some of the politics out there in the world, and all of a sudden, boom, the Houston Rockets games were no longer shown on TV over there, and et cetera, et cetera. It became a big controversy.
You know who
beyond
the
that,
Rockets owner is, right?
Yeah, it's one of the Fertitta brothers.
Right, there you go. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, interestingly enough, and we're going to get into some of the gambling aspect of this here to maintain the facade.
Fertitta is his name.
Yeah, here to maintain the facade of neutrality. I believe this is the case. You can't go to a station casino in Vegas and bet on the Rockets.
Interesting.
So, yeah, one of the ways that the gambling aspect has so many nuances that people aren't aware of that I'll try to get into here that, will play into why I think the Chinese main event is the biggest fight of the card. So anyway, so the general manager there comes out, says something that the Rockets are practically canceled in China. Their games were off TV and massive criticism on their social media, et cetera, et cetera. And very tellingly, we have a lot of basketball players, like a lot. Now, once they've made their money, they feel like they become, spokespeople for causes and things like that. Not one opened his mouth for the cause of Taiwan. And why is that? Because the market in China is so big and they make so much money over there in sneakers, in T-shirts, not even T-shirts, but the basketball shirt with the name on the back. That stuff is popular over there. And again, all you need to do is grab a small percentage and you're still grabbing a huge number of the population over there. So much money comes in from China for there that the league is not adverse to taking social stances and things. And it wouldn't have been unusual for them to say, yeah, we stand behind Taiwan, but they clammed up too.
Right.
Money talks, and China is wielding a lot of money and power, on the world level. So, and not a single basketball player stood up. Well, I think there was one, and I'm not going to get his name correct, but I think he was a Turkish center.
Oh, yeah, Enes Kanter.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. That's it. That's exactly who it is. And he was the only guy who had the guts. And I probably Enos is not one of the guys cashing a 6 or 7 figure check from China. You know what I mean? It's like there's no real reason for them to have noticed him. He wasn't on the Rockets. He didn't play with Chinese players. He's a Turkish national and he's not a superstar. But Kyrie Irving, LeBron James, go back many generations. And here's the other part. Once the players retire, many of them extend their careers by playing it. Stephon Marbury, who was an all-star in the United States for a long time, went and played in China for a few years, they go over there for tours and things like that. The teams go over there, and every time they go over there, they come back with some money. And nobody was willing to stand up and say, we're gonna talk about Taiwan as a political issue, and this is our stance on it because the money they didn't want to lose it. Enes Kanter was the only one who spoke up. So that's a hint. And the NBA, you're talking about players that make 9-figure contracts. So it gives you a hint that it is big money. It's not, we're making some extra money here because, we're putting together, like the WNBA, if they made a little bit of money in China, they can bring it in with the check that they get, then their money starts to increase. These guys are already crossover multi-millionaires. So, to move the needle for LeBron, if LeBron lost $1 million, endorsement, I don't think he'd bother too much. But he makes a lot more than that off his shirts and shoes and, anything like that. An appearance tour, who knows what they might pay him for an appearance tour over there. And some of the players do that. Some of the retired players still do that. So not that I'm an NBA expert, but it's notable because, like I said, those guys are where the UFC wants to be or should be in terms of paying their athletes. So because the money doesn't trickle down to the athletes, if Venom with Weili Zhang's, the Venom shirts sell in China by the bushels, the UFC will cut Weili a check. But I guarantee you that it's not going to be, that she won't even know the real money that the UFC made behind the scenes on her shirt and her name over there because of the way their contracts are constructed. And she'd be okay with that. They unfortunately, these athletes, They toil in a hard sport where they probably made very little money until they made it to the UFC. Now she's a champion. So they say, yeah, here's $1 million. She's going to be happy. But, if they sold 50 million in shirts and outfits and her image, so yeah, I think that market with the population there, the fact that they've stated that there are 170 million people over there that were fans a few years ago, and with the, again, and then there's the example of the Chinese gymnasts, swimmers, and things like that. If you're Chinese, the country backs you. It's not like the WNBA and the NBA here where it's like considered a lesser league. They seem to consider the women as elite as the men, or at least respect the differences so that the women are respected as athletes. The Chinese gymnasts, swimmers, those are the two sports that immediately come to mind, are very well respected over there. It's not like here where the NBA is seen as a secondary league or anything like that. So this main event, properly marketed, could draw the imagination of a great deal of that country. All you would need is a fourth or a fifth of the population over there to tune into that fight, just that fight, and you've got more people watching it than if every single household in the United States turned on the fight.
But it still doesn't equal, well, from a pay-per-view standpoint, it doesn't equal the money aspect, right?
Doesn't matter. Because, like I said, so they'll report 600,000 pay-per-view sales in the States. And people say, oh, the show was terrible. They did terrible. They're not going to do terrible. Because that fight in China, how is that going to air? Do they have a pay-per-view structure? Because if they have a pay-per-view structure, whatever the pay-per-view number over there is going to be much more valuable. It may not be pay-per-view over there. They may have a different way of distributing it. But whatever television or whatever streaming service is going to be the official signal for that show, that is the contract that's interesting for me to know about with the UFC. How much is the distribution company in China paying them for the rights to air this show? Because they must be looking at it and saying, people are going to watch this fight. We're going to want this. And the UFC is going to present it that way to them. Hey, man, we got something for you. The first ever Chinese versus Chinese world title fight in mixed martial arts history.
Yeah, I was looking at the numbers for Olympics. 600 million people in China watch the Olympics.
Yeah, and it's not this is a situation where the Asian markets also, because for lack of a better word, they're very nationalistic, very almost racist. They care more about Chinese athletes than they really do about other athletes. They care about Kobe Bryant. Back in the day, he was a huge star over there. Again, that was a guy who was making a lot of money off of T-shirts from China. But they care about the elite, the top of the top. Now you could argue that you have actual Chinese athletes that have reached that pinnacle. I know it's a lower weight class and stuff like that, but again, they don't judge athletes the same way we do. And again, with a proper marketing campaign, a smart marketing campaign, you don't say, well, it's women, so it's not as good as the men. You don't even mention that. You hype it as the biggest thing, never before seen. China versus China, world champion versus, challenger at the highest level of the sport. They can capture people's imagination over there. You've got the example of Japan. Now, I know they're opposing cultures. So it's not fair to say, what Japan does, China will follow, or China will, Japan will do what China, that they're the exact same. But when when Japan was doing their mega pride shows, where they were doing New Year's Eve shows, the way that the distribution in Japan worked was that Japan basically has multiple cable channels and everything like that. Back then, there wasn't as much streaming and things like that. But the way Japan worked is terrestrial channels, like in the United States, NBC, ABC, and CBS, the channel 2, 4, and 7 in New York, whatever numbers they are in the other places. Those are the normal channels that everybody gets. Terrestrial TV is everything in China and Japan.
Mhm.
And Pride got on terrestrial, their channel,
Fuji.
and on New Year's Eve, it was basically them versus a big variety show that they do over there.
Mhm.
Half the people would tune into the variety show, and half the country would tune into the Pride fights.
Yep.
And that could very well be happening here in China. What I would love to see, we recently had the Super Bowl this weekend, and there was a spot that they did during the broadcast where it said, the NFL is becoming a worldwide sport, and there are parties and people following it all over the place. And they showed, people in Australia and people in New Zealand, people in Brazil and people in Europe, all, in rooms with hundreds of, maybe thousands of people watching and cheering and the same kind of body language and excitement that the American public does. I would love to see what is going on during that fight in China and how much a hype they are actually able to create. Those are good examples with the NFL marketing and putting it out. There are people watching it all over the world. I was able to watch it here. The Super Bowl, I predict probably Super Bowl III, when the Jets won in the 60s, wasn't aired in Costa Rica live. They've grown. Now they're going into the biggest head count market that they could. India has more people now than China by a little bit, but that's a market for the future. They haven't quite cracked India. Now, the Endeavor product does have experience with that. Now that they tied up the WWE did have a run within the last few years where they had an Indian WWE world champion. And, he had come in, he had done his work, coming up and stuff like that. He had proven it. His name is Singh. Last name is Singh. I won't remember his first name, but, and then they also had the Giant from over there. So with the WWE, they've actually already dabbled in that market, and they already therefore have TV contacts and this and that and the other thing. So as soon as they find an Indian athlete that can do UFC at a certain level, that's a future market for them. And that's how Endeavor is going to be thinking about this type. That's what this merger does. Is it opens new doors for new opportunities for them to distribute their total products. And the UFC is far short of the WWE in distribution. They've managed to equal it in the Arab market because of their presence in Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia having an interest in fighting and things like that. Those markets, the UFC has made an impact, just like, the UFC. People may not be aware of it. You remember Brock Lesnar during his title run got wiped out by Cain Velasquez and lost his title to Cain Velasquez. If you're not a WWE fan or following that, do you realize that in Saudi Arabia, the WWE did a rematch, quote unquote, a rematch between Brock Lesnar and Cain Velasquez, and Cain lay down? These are options for the Endeavor company that, they could be thinking about, that nobody is even conceiving of these ideas at the level of, this is a lousy main event. They're not worried about the main event of 300 selling, if it sells 600, 700,000 pay-per-views and they had a big, great fight, it might sell 1.2 pay-per-views. You think 500,000 pay-per-views is going to move these people's needle the way some of the things I'm talking about it does? Please.
And
You
talk
want to
about
get into the gambling?
yeah, talk about the gambling aspect, because I know that's something you kind of touched on, but I think it's still something that a lot of American fans don't understand, because I see a lot of people saying like, oh, they were floating the Hamzat fighting Edwards, right? And they're saying he doesn't deserve this fight. But it's like you said, gambling is the other thing that moves the needle in the UFC. You got pay-per-view draws and you have gambling draws.
Yeah. Now, that started with the Fertittas. At some point, the Fertittas were casino owners. And I believe it was Lorenzo who was actually employee of the Nevada State Boxing Commission. So now that gave them a lot of power. They actually went to Atlantic City, and the Jersey State Boxing Commission with their lawyer, Nick Lembo, was actually the first commission to approve the sport. But that probably comes with a lot of politics, and I'm sure that they knew who the Fertittas were. In fact, there was a meeting where the Fertittas and Dana met with the Jersey State Boxing Commission to lay down some of what the unified rules were going to be. No one recognized that meeting. Actually, one of the reporters that's out there, a guy named Keith Mills, was actually at that meeting and photographed it. He was more of a photographer than a reporter, but he was a combination of both. And it went under the needle, and he's not, Ariel Helwani in terms of memory. People remember Keith Mills, but Keith Mills was doing really important work there, and he actually photographed that meeting. So it definitely happened. And the Fertittas were involved with that. There's casino owners in the boxing commission, and they're planning to bring the sport on. And you think that they weren't some of the first people to take bets on the sport? And when they say the house always wins, let's say, there's a $10 bet, and you win. You have to bet $5 to win $10, and then the other guy has to bet $10 to win $5. Now those numbers are skewed a little bit; they're not exact. Why? Because the difference goes to the house. So the house does always win, no matter who wins usually. They may get caught every once in a while with a big underdog or whatever, but in the long run, they always win. So I think that they wanted to bring on the sport because they knew that by creating a new sport for the casinos, that yet another income stream would be created, aside from eventually boxing out all the, apparel owners and grabbing that money and grabbing other sponsors' money and things like that, and putting themselves in between. You can't have your logo on any fighter or anything like that without paying the UFC off first. Aside from all that, they wanted to create a new sport for gambling. So now that's the Fertittas aspect of it. But Endeavor wasn't a gambling company, but I don't think that stuff would get lost. Dana's still there, and Dana was, Massachusetts white trash, to be honest with you. But he became a Vegas gambling entity himself, learned the game from the Fertittas at a high level. And now, he's banned from casinos because of his style of betting and stuff like that. Very aggressive, knows what he's doing. And I think he's learned the game very well. So, the Chinese gambling houses over there, may have a consultant fee to make the line, may have to give up a percentage of the winnings to make the line with input from Dana. Where would you set the line for this fight? And again, all you need is a couple of bettors. Give the example of a $20 million bet. Let's say it's a 2-to-1 odds. So, and this is very rudimentary numbers, but so people can keep track of it. One guy bets 10 million to win 20 million. The other guy bets 20 million to win the 10 million. So 30 million is the pot. So say the UFC were to get about 10% of that on the back end. That's $3 million. When you hear, this UFC in Las Vegas, that at the 15,000 seat arena, I forget what it's called there, but they did a bunch of events there. Now I can't hear you, Todd.
T-Mobile Arena.
Yeah, whichever, the T-Mobile Arena or the one before that, which was named after one of the basketball players or whatever. But the house,
Thomas and Mack Center.
There you go. Yep. The gate for the entire show, they announced it proudly. The gate for the show was 2.6 million, 3 million, you're talking about making that in one fell swoop off of one bet if they have a couple of those big players. So, yeah, I think Endeavor's interested in that. And I think in China, they're going to be bettors that way. Bettors like that show up. That's part of the danger and the influence. It's been there in boxing since the very beginning. Since the very beginning. In the very beginning, you would even have fighters in newspapers tell the other fighter, I'll put up my purse as a bet against your purse. And what would happen is they would have to put up a percentage of the money, and somebody trusted would hold the money. This was all in cash back in the turn of the century or last century now. So, it's the influence of Thomas Kinahan in boxing now, or whatever. I mean, it may not be Thomas, but Kinahan and Daniel Kinahan. That's what it was. That's maybe what his influence is. He's one of those guys no one knows what he did. Yeah, I think he's a better. And there are guys like that on these fights. In boxing, for example, you're Joe Schmo and you're walking through California, you're on vacation in California, and you love boxing, and you want to go to Freddie Roach's gym. You can't just walk into Freddie Roach's gym and watch guys train. But any video that you see of them, it seems to be some public people there. And what are they, like super fans? Like, oh, I love this guy. It's like, okay, he's a great fan, so we'll let him in there. Some of those guys are like the eye in the sky. They're looking for inside information for the bettors. And that's like, I know this guy. I knew I got a tip, this, that, the other stuff. That goes on in bushels. And in the UFC, it does as well. We've talked about it. Why has Chimaev moved the needle so much? Because Chimaev brings out Dagestani betting money.
Chechnya and Chechnya.
Yeah.
And other areas around surrounding areas too, yeah.
Yeah,
he's from Chechnya.
I think they're neighboring countries, and the ethnicity is relatively the same. It may be Kadyrov himself, the premier, the guy who's in charge down there, the president or whatever you want to call him, who's a big bettor. And he's a man that, he's playing a power game over there that's very, very much life and death in many situations, but he plays and he's been very visible in boxing. Gosh, I didn't realize we'd get this far into it, but there was a boxing world champion, Chigaev. I may get his name wrong, but he fought an Australian guy recently. The Australian guy went over there, won the world title, and then tested positive for steroids. Believe it or not, the Australian tested positive for steroids in Russia. And he always disputed it. But it was under Kadyrov's watch. And Kadyrov was seen at that fight on a gaudy purple couch, screaming and pumping up his guy and at the top of his lungs into the fight. Maybe he just loves the sport that much. Or maybe there was $10 million riding on a bet, or $5 million or $20 million, or whatever floats his boat.
And he hosts a lot of UFC fighters. I'm sure there's a reason for that.
Yeah, he gives away fight. You know what? If you've been betting Chimaev, you've been making money. Simple as that, right? He's undefeated. Khabib, undefeated, right there. If you have no losses, you may have to bet a lot of money to make some money, because maybe the odds favor them and stuff at this point, because they've done the work. But if they've never lost, he's never lost money. No, could that be the reason why he loves them so much? So, and now you look at it, and we've mentioned this in other fights, and I'll give you the other example. This is a repeat from a previous podcast, but hopefully there are other odds. We did shows in Atlantic City at the Trump Taj Mahal, Trump's biggest casino in Atlantic City, 5,000 people in the arena. We got every room for every fighter, cornerman, and staff free. We got food for them each, 5 days worth of food free. We got the staff at the arena where, people have to take the tickets and people have to seat you, and there's bartenders and people selling concessions and things like that. All that staff, the casino paid for it. We had nothing come out of pocket for those shows, except for we had to pay the fighters. And what was the reason for that? Because the sponsor, the main guy providing the money for the show, was a Russian promoter at the time. It was actually a female Russian promoter named Natalia. And the reason for that was because of gambling. And in New Jersey, because in New Jersey, it's the New York, Jersey State Athletic and Gambling Control Board. Because at the end of the day, they want the gambling to be by the books and not underground and things like that. And they obviously don't want a gambler going and making a fixed fight and stuff. So they're in control of all of that. And because of the guy who was really in charge, because of his background and stuff like that, he probably could not get, and I don't know exactly details of what that might be, but he didn't even want to try to get a promoter's license. And I think, probably is because you got to present your taxes. You got to, and, who knows what's going on there. They do look into your taxes and things like that, but he didn't want to deal with any of that. So he put his wife up as the face. So Natalia, and, people can look up the names and stuff. I'm not trying to throw people under the bus, and I'm sure they're gone and back in Russia at this point anyway. But so Natalia was the promoter for that, and they knew a Russian gambler that was up on the Trump Taj Mahal by about $5 million. It was in the millions of dollars that he was up on them. So the Taj Mahal would do anything, including pay for a couple $100,000 MMA show just to get this guy back. And all we had to do was roll him out every show. And you can see how many of those Euphoria shows were done in the Taj Mahal. And I'm telling you, the finances for him right here is that those shows were no money out of pocket except for the fighter pay.
Live to Fight Design is a fighter and gym banner company in Iowa that is owned by Sean Clemens. If you're a fighter or a gym owner that is interested in ordering a banner, you can reach Sean Clemens on Instagram at Live to Fight Design. If you use Todd's promo code Todd Atkins, you will get $20 off of your order. Line shopping for the best odds matters. And that is why any profitable sports bettor needs to be using multiple sports books. Thankfully, there has never been a better time to get signed up, and they are here to connect you with the best promotions industry-wide. Using their link, signupexpert.com-TAS, you can get access to all the sportsbooks in your region, along with a review of each platform and its unique features. Most importantly, this page automatically connects you to the top promotions at each book, allowing you to start line shopping with an enhanced.
So the gambling is big time. So, what happens in China? Maybe some of these gamblers have already been betting on the UFC. Maybe one of them lived in the States for a while, has followed the sport, likes it. Very interestingly, and this comes from the early days of the sport, you would get people. I'll give you one example is Phil Baroni. Phil, who's I believe still in jail in Mexico at this point and probably not doing very well. But Phil in the early days was a very noted and gambler. Friends with Joey Odessa, who's the bookmaker. And you think Joey wasn't getting some type of information out of Phil? What's this guy like? What's his mentality like? What's he look like? This, that, the other stuff. Yeah. You know, the possibility exists right now in China with the sport in its nascent level, in its just birth level, that the odds makers or whoever's handling the gambling there could get caught. And those guys don't want to get caught. They want as much information as possible. So is Endeavor getting a consulting fee from some of the betting houses to make sure that the lines are appropriate and that they don't screw up? You know, who knows how that goes? Who knows how the inside information goes? You know, like I said, all you need to do is attract a couple of these gamblers, and Weili may have, you know, somebody, you know, who's a multimillionaire who has a crush on her, who's willing to bet 10 million bucks.
I
Or
would
maybe
assume Weili's going to be a decent favorite, you know, probably pretty significant.
Yeah, she's got the resume for it. But sometimes, like, you know, Chimaev to me is a phenomenal fighter, but sometimes his lines are way high because if Weili's name is much bigger, then money's going to come in on her regardless. The other girl may have more of a chance than she's being given. The house will want to know that. You know what I mean? It's not like, oh, well, Weili is the champion and she's the one who's been well known, so the other girl has no chance. No, you don't know. No, that's a fanboy thinking. You know, it's a guy watching in the bar. It's like, yeah, I don't know this guy. He has no chance. The house wants to go beyond that. They want to know. Is there a real chance? What's going on here? What are the skills like? What's this, that, or the other thing? And again, in the early days of MMA, especially there was illegal gambling where, you know, you could gamble at houses overseas and stuff, and how you got your money in the US, you know, sometimes came down to a guy delivering you an envelope at your door. You know what I mean? Going back to the old days. But those houses sometimes put out lines that guys who really, like Phil Baroni, who knew the game inside, said, oh man, they got this one wrong. I'm making money on this one. And the sport's gotten so big now that you know, the Chinese betting houses don't want to relive that mistake.
Yeah, the lines are much more competitive now.
Yeah, and Endeavor, again, who knows? You know, if I understand at a rudimentary level, what they could do is it's very simple. You know, they've got Endeavor is a company based in the United States, but they could very well open Endeavor China as a subsidiary over there with bank accounts separate, taxing separate, everything like that. And none of that money is ever seen or has to come in here. And the stockholders will enjoy the benefits of having some money over there that's profitable and things like that. But they will never probably release or let us know even how much money that came in or got moved over there. But again, if 100 million people watch the fight, there's never, ever been a UFC fight in the United States where 100 million people of the US population watch the fight. Not Brock Lesnar, not Ronda Rousey, not Conor McGregor, not all three of them combined. So you take that for what it's worth. They'll never be able to sell that main event here in the United States as the main event because the crowd is just not going to be interested in it. In fact, it'll be a little bit of a black eye for them because, you know, the crowd will poo-poo the event as not being the main event is not being good enough.
I wonder if they're selling it as the main event in China.
They should. You know, I don't know if that involves, you know, it's interesting. Things change over time, but they can do whatever they want. they could definitely say it's the main event. It has to do with, you know, how are they commercializing it? You know, where, you know, are they getting spokespeople? Are they getting, you know, famous Chinese athletes to say, hey, I can't wait to see this fight, or the main event of UFC? Back in the old days of WWE, like I remember going as a child to Madison Square Garden to see WWE wrestling. And the title fight was not the last fight. The title fight was presented as the 6th or 7th of an 11-fight card, and there were a few fights afterwards to kind of peak the card and then take you down a little bit. So this idea that the main event has to be the final thing is more of a TV invention, you know? And so in China, maybe, you know, if they put on Jiri versus Pereira after Weili, they might even just cut it off in China. Who cares about that fight in China? You know, because how many hardcore UFC fans like us are going to be there? If this fight is only watched by the hardcore fans in China, then the UFC didn't do their job. They're sitting on a crossover fight if they do the right work on it. And they've shown as a media machine that they do know how to do that. You know, they do know how to attract beyond attention. And in China, they're dealing with a market they may not be 100% familiar with. But again, Endeavor brings some experience there. WWE brings some experience there. And business is business. You know, the dealings like with the NBA and stuff are quite public. And, you know, again, would David Stern or Silver, the new commissioner for the NBA, he's not so new anymore. He replaced David Stern, but he's been around for a little bit now. Would they take a phone call from Ari Emanuel? Probably.
Yeah, of course. I mean, his brother's high in politics too, so.
Yeah, so I mean, so there are levels to this game. It's not like, yeah, you know, I got $50 I'm going to put on this fight, and they haven't put a good fight on this, so I'm not giving my $50. I'm not paying. I'm not betting on this. You think these guys care? They're playing the game at a whole different level. Is my opinion. That's what's going on here. So that China fight, they're gonna look at each other when the final number comes in, and nobody in the U.S. or public or anyone like that even has to know about it. But when they're smiling and they're looking at each other and there seems to be an inside joke, it could very well be the amount of money they made in China for that fight that nobody cared about here.
Yeah. I reached out to Andy Wang because I know he's there, and I'm gonna, you know, I haven't got a response to him because I just reached out to him a little while ago, but I'm gonna see if I can bring him on and see if he can give me some kind of inside information on what's going on with that over there.
Are there billboards in Shanghai? Are there stadiums, or, you know, remember the old closed circuit models where you used to go to, you know, like I have a friend from California. He's an older man now, and he remembers going to see Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier, the first fight at the LA Coliseum, or, you know, where they put it on the screen and they watch the fight live there. That closed circuit model, are they doing that in China where they're hosting, you know, events where, you know, 10,000 people are getting together to watch the fight, and you get that kind of atmosphere there, and everybody's rooting for, you know, whatever? And here's a situation where if it was, again, we'll use the example because there hasn't been a Chinese male that's gotten quite to the title picture yet. But I'll use the example of Japan. When Okami fought for the title, if they had done that, you would have been, it was Okami versus Silver or whoever, you would have had everybody rooting for Okami, obviously. But now you're in an unprecedented situation where a stadium of 10,000 Chinese fans could be watching the UFC, and it could be split. One side wants one to win, the other side wants the other to win, because it's an all Chinese affair. The amount of money, if they're not thinking this way, then, you know, the stockholders for Endeavor should be wondering why they have this stock.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because, like you said, it's not something they can market in the U.S. as the main event.
Yeah.
But I think they could pull it off in China, and the Chinese people would probably
Yeah.
believe it is the main event.
And here's the thing is now you're talking about them doing shows in Africa and things. You got Duplessis, you've had Adesanya. At one point you had Ngannou, you had um uh oh the kid who was the welterweight champion. He was very good too. But anyway, so you've had African presence for several champions. They've never done it there. Why? Because there's no guarantee that those economies could support them making the huge money that they would like and need to make. The Chinese market has crossed over into that level where it's like, yeah, we can do business there. And they didn't. This is by chance. They're happy about this. They want this fight and they want it to go over big over there. I'm almost surprised it wasn't done over there. But that will come. Maybe if we get a compelling match and there's going to be a rematch, then you see them return to China with a full-blown show. The last time they were in China, they had a main event with Kung Lee because they didn't have any Chinese athletes. Now that's not the case. They've done it tough. They can fill a card. Just Chinese athletes, in other events, there's events going on over there, sports being practiced. And you've got world championship levels in the women's ranks. When they go back there, it'll be a whole different ball game. Kung Lee was a Vietnamese fighter. Yeah, he was known, and Vietnam's a gambling culture as well. They'll, people maybe travel. Kung Lee, if he had that type of fame in his country, it was easier for them to travel. They made money off of those shows. That's why Kung Lee is one of the people that's in the lawsuit. Because he knows that they monetized in a way that he got none of that. Now picture the difference of going to China even though Kung Lee's an impressive athlete and he's a foreigner. He's not a Chinese athlete. So the difference now is this is a 2.0 version of them returning to China.
Yeah. And, Dana's talking about getting to India too, which you mentioned. Probably because of the populace, just like China.
Yeah, and they are keeping an eye on the market, and they're not complete. Like Dana, at some point, is enough of a watchdog where, in the contenders, I think you're getting a little bit of the product watered down. Where some guys that wouldn't have been in the when again, just to mention Phil Baroni, when Phil was in the UFC. His division was stacked with guys, and they were all excellent, and they were all, top 10, top 15. Now the weight classes go so deep that, they got 40 guys in each weight class. Yeah, some of them are not UFC level compared to back then when the roster was much smaller. So they're not going to just do China and then make it look like a hook and shoot.
Right.
They've been waiting since the Kung Lee days for it to let the fighters develop. And this is just the first taste this week, this UFC 300 rather, is the first taste of Chinese athletes are getting to the world-class level to the point where now you have an all Chinese world title fight in the UFC. That didn't happen overnight. They've been working on getting to that level. And then now that they're there, they will go back to that market and make money.
Yeah, I think it's a, great. What I like about the show and having you on is, you have this opportunity to educate people on things that I don't really see being talked about much, on other shows in general, that I don't think people have a good under.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Maybe, maybe I'm nuts, but I don't think so. I think they have to answer the taxpayers. I'm sorry, the stockholders. And, the stockholders call them up and be like, what's going on here? And they go, look, we're going to make a lot of money in China. Don't worry. Your dividend check will be, it'll be in the mail. No, okay, we'll watch. And now they have to deliver. So they have to deliver. But we've seen how their hype machine can work in the States. release that hype machine in China where people's imagination might get captured, and they could, be everywhere. Are there? Ask Andy Wang. Are there billboards in Shanghai? Or are on the highway? Everybody sees Weili versus her opponent. Bigger than life, like the way billboards have an effect on people. What other and there they would probably be those electronic billboards, like you get kind of in the Blade Runner kind of
Right.
vision of things. You know what I mean? Because their cities are much more modern than ours at this point. All that electronic media. What could be easier than hiring a bunch of people to do clips and put them on Weibo? Boom, 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 boom. How many clips do you want that are going to get 10 million views? Whereas if you get 10 million views in the United States, it's huge. 10 million views is much more attainable in China because of the number of people. But again, 10 million views is 10 million views. That means it's 20 million eyes that saw the thing. So yeah, they and they should be doing that already, just for that fight. And then little clips of, how tough Justin Gaethje is, and how much of a workhorse Max Holloway is, and how they're in for a treat with that fight. And then on top of that, capping it all off, China versus China in a world title match. People will be like, wow. Show Justin Gaethje highlights and then sell the Chinese main event. Can't go wrong with that to Chinese people. You know what I mean? They'll see something that's remarkable with the highlights of the men. They're going to get that. They're going to get to see that warmed up, and then they're going to get to see. And Weili, Weili's put on some great fights. It's not like she's maintaining a lower level at that thing. She's at a pretty high level. I'm not saying she's Shevchenko just yet, but she's not far behind. She's been very, very, very well trained. So I think the UFC also goes into this with a little bit of confidence in that, yeah, we do have the right athlete to try this the first time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting to talk about. I wish we could see the numbers, if they would share them somehow.
Yeah, it'd be fascinating. Fascinating. Maybe we could get our WikiLeaks hackers out there to
Well, maybe
get
Andy
in.
would know. I mean, maybe China will put out something.
Yeah, maybe they put something out there. Maybe it'll be propaganda too. But whatever it is, it would be definitely interesting to see what it is, because I think you'll see a vast difference in numbers in the United States.
Well, Miguel, I want to give you a chance to talk about the dog rescue. I know you had sent me some statistics in San Antonio, but I wanted to give you.
Oh yeah, well, here in Costa Rica, we had a situation, just the saddest thing, where 3 Belgian dogs were poisoned in a neighborhood near here. And there are laws here that are invoked, and everybody knows who the guy is, but getting the authorities to actually move on it, and you don't have proof, you don't have video, you don't have that. It's just everybody knows who it was because the guy's been complaining for months about them. But that's kind of circumstantial evidence, and getting the cases to move and the right things to be done is taxing, and it's more emotionally taxing than actual work to be done, because at the end of the day, we had to deal with 3 dogs dead, stiff as a board, and it wasn't a good weekend.
Yeah. And everyone, we always let Miguel talk about this because this is a project that he works on and he's passionate about. And
I'd rather help animals than people at this point in life. That's kind of I'll help somebody if they need the help and they deserve the help. But a lot of the times, people are much more complicated to deal with. The animals are very simple. They give you pretty much unconditional love, and when something like that happens, it's even more tragic. This like I said, this wasn't a good weekend.
Yeah. And people who want to help, we always have the GoFundMe in the show notes if you want to contribute to this. It's important to us, and you can find it there. And if you could contribute to it, it would mean a lot to both of us. And
much appreciated. Be a good cause. I assure you the money would go to helping the animals.
And Miguel, as always, these are kind of episodes really I enjoy because you have an opportunity to educate people from your experience. People don't know Miguel's been involved in a ton of matchmaking shows, that he's done hundreds. And he has kind of a good understanding of things that a lot of people don't.
I've match made on 5 continents.
Yeah.
I've done shows in Japan. I've done shows in Brazil. I've done shows in Abu Dhabi. I've done shows in Europe. Those were grappling shows in Europe and Abu Dhabi, but a lot of the level, once you get to a certain level with them, are at a high level. And and Russia would be considered Europe as well. So those were full out MMA shows and big shows too.
And even the early gambling discussion, around the sport, you were kind of with Nick Kalikas and
and Bodog was one of the first big sports books that took gambling, and that was when we started to do our shows. They only made lines for our shows in the very, very early days. So the gambling's something I have some insight on as well. So and I've seen high level gambling from Abu Dhabi to Atlantic City to elsewhere. So it's a fascinating world that the guy who's calling in his $20 and $50 bets, or putting up $100 to try to make $80 back and building up his pot and stuff like that. Those guys have a place. The books count on you to be there in groups in mass. But when you want singular attention to the people, it's the big gamblers that really move the needle, and that these guys know. They know these guys by name.
I think it's a great thing to end on, and everyone that enjoys this episode, and I know our subscribers have been growing, and we really appreciate that. We hope more of you subscribe to the episodes and subscribe to the channel, and make sure to like the videos. That helps with stuff.
And comment. I've seen a couple of people commenting. We were talking about Conor McGregor last episode, where we were talking about him possibly being on substance abuser and having problems with alcohol and drugs and things like that. And one of the followers, I'm not going to get his name. I'm not going to guess at the name. I think I remember it, but I don't want to get it wrong. But a big shout out to him, because he sat down and wrote out a full paragraph about how another part of the chemical mix of Conor's situation is steroids. And I wholeheartedly agree with him. I totally missed it in the podcast, and I thank him for putting it out there. And if you've got smart, intelligent comments out there, we will follow up on it. I do pay attention to that, and I enjoy the discussion, and I enjoy when someone like that calls me out when I miss something. And I did miss the steroids being an aspect of Conor, because that's pretty clear as well.
Yeah. And I think we do have a pretty educated group of commenters, because kind of the subject matter we cover. So more of you comment, that'd be great. And as always,
we'll shout you out here. We'll keep the conversations going. I enjoy it.
Yeah. And as always, everyone who enjoys the episodes, we appreciate it. And until the next one, take care.
Hi, it's Claudia Correa, and I just want to sit down and thank you all for watching the MMA Conspiracy Hour with Todd Atkins and Miguel Iterate. Miguel has been the matchmaker of over 200 shows across the world. Miguel has worked with Hook and Shot, Euphoria, Bodog Fight, and ADCC. You can also find Miguel on his YouTube channel at MMA Collector 74. And don't forget to follow me at It's Claudia Correa.